I think I'm recording. So hopefully, our objective is to go back and just review where we've come from, sort of all the way back to the beginning of the year, in connection with the country's growth and in particular slavery. So the whole purpose of chapter 15 is to set us up for the Civil War. Some of it means we got to go back and review some stuff to see how we got where we're at. Some of it's going to teach us some stuff that maybe we didn't already know. So I've told you in the past that the Civil War isn't a war about slavery. Right? Do you remember that? Well, my job in chapter 15 is to prove it. So that's kind of what the goal is here. Slavery is an issue. It's a big issue, but it's not the issue. So we're going to have to take a look at what do the economies of the North and South look like, and how are they similar and different? What does it mean when I say economy or economies? If I told you to describe the economy of Nebraska, rural, but that's not really economy. You're close though. You're going the right direction.
Town, city, or like population.
No, you're going the right direction here. When I ask what the economy of an area is, that means how do the people make their money? So if you had to characterize, if you weren't in Nebraska and you had to explain to someone what is the economy of Nebraska, even though it's not necessarily us, how would you describe the economy of Nebraska? Yeah, agricultural, right? It's farmers.
Small business.
You see corn and cows and small businesses. That's another good one. In Blair, America, I don't know if any of you are farmers in here, but we're all closely impacted by agriculture. So even those of us in Nebraska that aren't farmers, we're connected. In Blair, a lot of our connection has to do with Cargill, right? So much of what happens at the Cargill factory is agriculture. Even if you're not a farmer, if you have a family that work out there, it's because of farmers. Or why is Woodhouse is the largest Ford dealer in the country, right? Or they sell the most F-150s in the country. Have you seen that advertisement before? F-150s are Ford pickup trucks. Why do you suppose that is?
Because they're built different.
Literally, aluminum.
Because what did you say, Jess? Yeah, because the state's full of farmers. They're going to sell a lot of pickup trucks to farmers. And it's between Iowa and Nebraska. Iowa's very agricultural. Do you think if Woodhouse was in Los Angeles, California, they'd sell as many trucks?
No, they sell a lot more like
No, they have little electric cars and,
They're gonna
and
get some electric
small
buses.
things and family cars and stuff like that, but probably not pickup trucks. So it's territorial. Are there other parts of the country where Woodhouse would be successful besides Blair, America? Absolutely there are. So that's what economies mean. So we're going to compare the North versus the South. If we were in Omaha, is the answer still agriculture?
maybe.
A lot of Omaha, even though most Omahans are farmers, just like we're not farmers, there is a close connection to agriculture. So our state is very heavily influenced by that. Other parts of the country, less agriculture and more industry, which means they manufacture stuff, and it might not have anything to do with farming. And then we've gone over this word 1,000,842 times. The word compromise, which means what? Somebody remind me compromise, please. To work together to achieve a common goal. If you compromise on something, do you get everything you want? Does the other person get everything they want? So the goal of a compromise is to make a deal. Both of you aren't super happy, but you're satisfied. That's a compromise. So you want to stay out till 11. Dad says 9. Compromise says 10. Or if you're my kid, it'd be 9:59, just because I like to win. So I don't want to end up halfway. I'm not going to have quite 10 o'clock, but 9:59, and not a minute later.
959.9.
Yeah, 9:59.99. So we're going back to compromise. There is no assignment, but there will be on Friday. So take your time and do your bestest on Friday. Don't be screwing around. Don't cause any problems for my substitute. if I have to hear from the substitute or Mrs. Glaser that there's issues, you won't like it on Tuesday next time we have class. So, very good. And Isaac, I'm going to tell you because I'll probably won't have you log in on Friday. Go in Otis. It'll be a worksheet that says like John Brown or something like that. So Friday, you don't have to log into my class because the substitute's not going to know how to run Zoom anyway. Just get on Otis and do that assignment, okay? Thumbs up so I know you got it. Okay, good. Thank you. And those of you listening to the recording, that means nothing to you. If I am recording, maybe I'm not even recording. Who knows? We should tell a funny joke just for fun. So those of you that are listening to the recording, pretend you heard a funny joke. Ha ha ha. For some reason it didn't. Stupid noises are a sign of immaturity, so don't do it. Just pretend you did it, and then you won't sound like a doofus. Okay, do it one more time and I kick you out of here. Did you hear nothing that I just said? Why? Okay, so maybe you should start paying attention. One more stupid noise comes out of your face, I'm kicking you out. Save your stupid noises for lunchtime or home. Okay, so we're looking at the time period leading up to the Civil War. There's an event that's going to take place at the end of chapter 15 in 1860 that's going to spark the division that creates the Civil War. Civil War means a war within the country. So it's America versus America. That sounds really weird. A lot of countries have gone through civil wars. In fact, there are civil wars that are taking place in the world today. But our civil war is unique to us. So we'll talk about the causes and the events that lead to that civil war as we get there. So I always use the analogy of America being a person. We go back to the 1600s. People came to the New World and began exploring, and we attempted settlements at places like Jamestown and Roanoke, and they really didn't turn out very well. Jamestown ends up being the first permanent settlement. By the 1700s, the British are firmly in control of everything that we know of as America, well, except for the western two-thirds of the continent. And then we fight for our independence, and slavery is also introduced into America. Not necessarily in that order, but in fact, that's not even 100% true. Slavery was introduced into America hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years earlier. We tend to think in our minds that slavery is a black and white thing. It's not necessarily the case. Native American tribes had used slaves for centuries. And it was very typical if my tribe goes to war with Josh's tribe, and of course my tribe is more powerful, and I defeat him, all the prisoners I take are slaves to me. There are even stories where, let's say for instance that Dustin's tribe is out hunting. He's got some guys out hunting, looking for deer, and somehow accidentally they come across some people from my tribe, maybe even my son. And one of Dustin's hunters gets in a fight or maybe accidentally kills my son. That's going to potentially mean war between our tribes. Whether it was an accident or not, you killed someone in my tribe. The response to that, in order to keep peace, because Dustin doesn't want war with me. My guns are too big. Buy a ticket to the gun show, Dustin. So in order to appease me, and this sounds ridiculous to even consider this would be a fair trade, he offers up one or two of his sons to become my slaves. You better offer up somebody else's sons.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of slavery existed everywhere, not just in America, but Native Americans were practicing it. Or even before blacks or Africans are introduced into North America, the idea of kind of like a partial slave already existed too. In fact, nobody got this first block? We'll see if anybody in here can remember it. Does anybody know the word that means when somebody gets passage to America, so somebody in Europe wants to come to America to live, so they don't have any money, so I pay for them to get on a ship and go to America, and in return, they're going to work for me for a certain number of years. Basically, they become my slave.
I have a word, I just can't think
It's a long time ago since we've discussed this, like back in the 1700s.
What's the first one?
Starts with an I. It's not immigrant, but it starts with an I.
Independence.
That's when you're by yourself.
Independence is sort of the opposite of this because being a slave is not independent. When I say it, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you actually remember? The word is indentured servant. You remember that? Remember the word? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Now, an indentured servant really isn't the same as a slave, but it's really kind of close. The difference is if I have an indentured servant, they're probably treated a little bit better than I would treat property, a little bit. And there's an end to indentured servitude. It's usually 5 to 7 years. Is there an end to slavery? Not unless you escape or some reason you're able to buy your freedom or something like that. So no, you're a slave forever or until your master decides to set you free. So we see slavery introduced way before the 1700s. 1800s, we're creeping across the country, and then the 1849, bam, gold rush, and all of a sudden we have an explosion across the country. We purchased Louisiana Territory in 1803. We kill off the Indian population slowly, and our need for slaves in the 1800s increases. Increases means goes up. Why do we see an increase in the need for slaves? Bigger farms.
More people come.
Because you're just lazy in general.
Gabe?
You just sit on your butt and watch
Everyone else, but
Immigrants coming to America. Now, a lot of times, quiet guys, please. A lot of times the immigrants coming to America, like the Germans, they're going to be smaller farmers settling in the Midwest without much of a need for slaves. But that's a good answer. Slaves for the gold rush?
I mean,
They just take it.
Most of the people that took off on the gold, it's a good answer too, but most of the people that took off on the gold rush, they don't have much. And owning a slave would be kind of expensive. What about technology?
There was technology.
What invention in the South caused a need for more slavery because of the expansion of land? The cotton thing. What's the cotton thing called?
The cotton drinker.
The cotton gin. So remember, the cotton gin can do the work of 50 men in a day. But it doesn't cut down on the need for slaves. It increases it because now southern planters could grow lots more cotton. So we see this massive increase in the need for slaves in the 1800s. By the mid-1800s, gold rush, we've sort of solidified our manifest destiny and created the outline of the map of America. Slavery was expanding. We've got inventions and better factories. America is really growing. So if we use the analogy of America as a person, 16 and early 1700s, we're a baby. We can't survive without the help of the mother, which is England. So, little tiny baby. We get to the mid-1700s, we declare our independence. We're starting to toddle around on our own. By the early 1800s, we've won independence. We're kind of like a preteen in the early 1800s. By the time we get to the mid-1800s, the gold rush, we are a big country. We've already demonstrated to the rest of the world that we could defeat other countries in warfare, both by defeating the British in the War of 1812 and the Mexicans in the Mexican War. So all of a sudden, we can flex a little. We're kind of like a young teenager walking around with our chests puffed up, and we see ourselves as a big deal.
every sixth grader.
Yeah, well, every middle schooler. I'll expand that a little bit. So that's where we're at. We look at America today, and it's kind of difficult to tell, but we're probably not necessarily in the prime of our life as the most powerful. We are the most powerful country, but as a country, we're probably just beyond that. We're definitely adultish, and we're growing older all the time. But at this point in our history, other countries look at us, and they either love us or hate us, but they all demonstrate a healthy respect for us. Because if they don't, they don't want to go to war with us, so they have to respect our muscles. So, if Dwayne Johnson is your least favorite person on the planet, you probably don't say to his face, You're my least favorite person on the planet because,
He will literally pick you up and
yeah, he's got muscles on top of his muscles. So. Okay, I need you to stop yapping unless you're called on, please. Remember, I'm trying to record for another class, so that your comments will muddle it all up. So, but yeah, you got to be kind of careful about that, and that's how America is. Even countries that don't like us, they kind of have to bite their tongue and deal with us. Otherwise, they might have to fight us, and nobody really wants to do that. Even the other big dog countries don't want war with the United States. So, 1820, this is taking us back in time a little bit. We had the Missouri Compromise. If you remember, the issue with the Missouri Compromise, Missouri wanted to be admitted as a slave state. But Congress wasn't willing to admit Missouri as a slave state because it would upset the balance of power in Congress, which would mean there would be more slave states than free states. At the time, it was equal. So the compromise was, let's add Missouri as a slave state, and at the same time, we'll add Maine as a free state. Maine didn't exist before. They just carved off a chunk of New Hampshire and created a new state. So they kept the balance the same. And they're going to have to go through this every time a new territory wants to become a new state. So what they did is they said, how about this? No new slave states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, which is the southern border of Missouri. And I'll show you the map of it just in a minute. So that's review. We've now got a way to determine whether new territories will be free or slave. The problem is, down the road, it'll be a new government that's making decisions. And anytime the government doesn't like the way things are going, they just pass new laws changing it. So this compromise keeps peace in 1820. Is it going to work in 1830 or 1850? Maybe, maybe not. So we always have to be cautious about that. When electing people that represent us, our leaders, we have to pick people that are going to make decisions based on what we want and need, not based on what they think. So, because they can change things quickly. Laws that exist today that protect some of our rights, if we're not cautious about it, could completely change in 5 or 10 or 30 years. So it's kind of an important deal that we pay attention to what's going on within our government. They also passed a law called the Wilmot Proviso that said no slavery in territories that are taken from Mexico. So according to the Wilmot Proviso, could Texas become a slave state?
No.
Yes.
If we back up, according to the Missouri Compromise, could Texas become a slave state?
Yes.
Yes, because it's south of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. But did we take Texas from Mexico? So could it be a slave state? Nope, not according to Wilmot Proviso. What about New Mexico and Arizona and California?
Yes.
No.
Nope, because we took them from Mexico. So no new slave. So this is a law that says no new slave states in those territories taken from Mexico. Then in 1850, new states threatened the balance of the slave and free states. So we're going to have another compromise. Here's the issue that we see. When Texas wants to become a state, Texas wants to pick. They don't like being told they can or cannot do something. But according to the Wilmot Proviso, all of this territory taken from Mexico, no slavery. All of this blue territory, north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, no slavery. So really, the only territory that would be eligible for slavery would be Arkansas territory, which today is Arkansas and Oklahoma, this area here, Oklahoma. Then it's got a little stick sticking off of it here. So it really limits new slave territories. But this is the map. This is the line the Missouri Compromise says. So if we're following the 1820 Missouri Compromise, when Nebraska decides to become a state, or has the population to become a state, could it, according to the Missouri Compromise, be slave? No, not an option. But it's going to be an option. Not so much for Nebraska, but for Kansas, it's going to become an issue later today. Nebraska, it's never an issue because we don't become a state until 1867, which is actually after the 13th Amendment to the Constitution is passed that ends slavery. So there's no more slavery in existence at that time. So review, setting up issues. Every law that's passed could have non-intended consequences. So we're going to have to go back and deal with the Missouri Compromise or completely ignore it. California wanted in as a free state. Congress was kind of like, meh, because we can't upset the balance every time we add a new state. If we add California as a free state, it's really going to tick off the southern states that believe slavery should be legal everywhere. So we have to be awful cautious, because if we screw up and upset the balance of power, the slave states, the southern states, are going to feel like they don't matter. So let me back up to the map real quick. If we count them all up, they're equal. But if we add California as a free state, there's more greens than there are reds, which means every law that gets passed is going to be in favor of the greens. If that's the case, how do you feel if you're a red state or a slave state? You feel like you don't matter?
Be mad.
That nothing that you do can have any say on what happens within the government because the balance of power is upset. So we have to be cautious of that, because if half of the country believes that they don't matter, that could potentially lead to a war with the other half of the country. Wonder what's coming. So here's what they decided to do. Let's add California as a free state. And then DC's not a state, but we'll make slavery illegal there also. Congress would not make any new laws over slavery territories taken from Mexico. So now Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona could potentially become slave states. And this did not make either side completely happy, but compromises almost never make both sides happy. The only way a compromise works out to make you happy is if you ask more than you hope to get, and you actually get what you had hoped for in the first place. So when compromising for a curfew, you ask for 11, you really only want 10. Knowing that dad says 9, and you end up getting 10, well, that's exactly what you wanted in the first place. You have to trick your parents into thinking that you're not satisfied. But you can't throw too big of a fit, because if you throw a fit, they'll just say, fine, you're not going out at all. And then you're like, well,
And then you go out anyway. Then you get grounded. There you go.
you can't go out, your truck won't start. It's too cold.
You're exactly right. It won't.
I know.
Can't hold.
How did you know? Are you stalking me right now?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's what I did over the weekend.
Wait a minute.
It actually does not start.
I had to put a new battery in my truck because it wasn't starting well.
Oh, because it should have started.
So when we take a look at the economies, the North was very much industrial and reliant on immigration. This is not new stuff. All of the textile mills, like Slater's mills and Lowell mills, to make cotton into cloth were located in the North, and that's where all the immigrants, like Irish immigrants, were working. So it's kind of like we already determined that Nebraska's economy is very agricultural. What if we lived in Los Angeles? What would you say the economy probably is?
Very big.
Tesla.
Yeah, technology, right? You'd have Tesla, and you've got factories,
Save the world.
manufacturing. It's different.
I want to know.
Would it be a little difficult for any of us, because we've lived in Nebraska forever? Some of you maybe not.
Yep.
Would it be difficult for those of us that have lived in Nebraska forever, especially small Nebraska, Blair being kind of small, to move into Los Angeles and fit in immediately?
You gotta talk like
Culture is very much different than it is here. Probably a little more fast-paced, a little bit different rules. So everything would be kind of strange to us. Los Angeles, it's full of movie stars and weirdos that eat granola bars and hug trees, and we just have corn and cows, So, yeah.
And they have the G-Wagon.
So when we take a look at the northern states are different. The southern states are almost entirely agricultural, but they have a dependence on each other. And the dependence is the connection with those factories in the north. They needed the South's cotton, And the South needed the North's textile mills. So there's a close reliance on each other. Without the textile mills, the Southerners would have to ship their cotton overseas, and then they make less money. Without the cotton from the South, the textile mills in the North would have to import the cotton to make into cloth, which means they make less money. So even though they're completely different, they depend on each other. So we depend on Hollywood, California to make movies to entertain us. Hollywood, California depends on us to grow cows for them to eat hamburgers and steaks.
Hamburgers and sushi.
Yeah. So there's a reliance on each other there. Because of that, it keeps peace between us. As different as parts of the country might be, we have reliance on other parts of the country. They need our beef. We need their movies. We don't need them. We like their movies. The North needs the cotton. The South needs the textile mills. And having cotton means there's a larger need for slaves. A larger need for slaves starts to mean we see more abolitionists. If you remember from our discussion last week, an abolitionist is someone who wants to abolish or do away with slavery. Now, what? Oh. Yeah, abolitionist wants to abolish or do away with slavery. Now, I think I asked this question last week, and it's kind of a trick question. Most Northerners did not own slaves. That is a fact. Some slaves existed in some northern states. That is a fact. Were most Northerners abolitionists? Why? The answer was no, for those of you that can't hear on the recording. The why?
Because they don't really want to go to war.
None of my business, right? Here's the thing. Northerners are just like you and I, and most of us, our whole day is planned, and our tomorrow is planned. I know that tonight I have a practice right after school. I get out of practice, and then I'll pick 10 and up from confirmation, and then we'll go to church because it's Ash Wednesday. For those of you on Friday, it's not Ash Wednesday. So my day is planned up until about 30 minutes before I go to bed. I don't have time to worry about other stuff. Tomorrow is very similar. Some of you go from school to practice, to another practice, to dance class, to homework, to bed. Some of you go from school to Xbox for 4 hours, to bed. But, what? No, the people that do 4 hours of Xbox actually don't do homework. They skip that
They
part.
stay up all night and then.
They wake up at 6 a.m.
I
Don't
disagree.
underestimate people that play video games. Some of us have
I
games.
do.
That's definitely not in the priority list. And the people that do 4.5 hours of Xbox, they don't even throw in the shower and the toothbrush.
Don't
Yeah, I do.
PlayStation?
PlayStation people, they shower.
No, they don't.
Yeah,
Yes,
they
I
do.
shower every day.
Well,
That's a lie.
No, I'm serious. You can ask my dad.
I'm just kidding. I hope you all shower every day. Some of you should shower 3 or 4 times a day.
Oh, I understand. Look,
So, yeah, I don't have time. And the other thing is, if it's not right in front of me, I don't really worry about it. But when things are brought to my attention, I start to pay a little bit more attention. We'll get to that in just a minute. So even though most Northerners were not abolitionists, just because it didn't have a direct impact on them, and throw in on top of that, what happens if we do somehow decide to abolish slavery? There's about 6 million slaves in the southern states. If they're freed, where are at least some of them going to go? North. And what are they going to do when they get north?
Job.
Get jobs. And what are they willing to work for?
less money.
Less.
Isn't that just
So almost nothing, because they've never had anything. So anything is better than what they've had in the past. So in fact, if I'm a Northerner, I might not only not be an abolitionist, but I might be in favor of keeping slavery, because I don't need 6 million people rushing into my part of the country taking my job. So I'm not going to say anything about it because it seems wrong and racist, but that might be the attitude or the feeling of a lot of Northerners. The South was ruled by agriculture. Cotton is the king. However, most Southern whites were poor farmers that could not afford slaves. So if most Southern whites could not afford slaves, are they going to be willing to fight a war to protect slavery? So that's evidence to help suggest that the Civil War isn't going to be fought over the issue of slavery because most Southerners don't own slaves. I'm going to fight a war over something I don't really care about.
So don't join the war.
And if they don't join the war, is it really going to be much of a war if it's only a minority of the people that are going to fight it from the South? So there's going to have to be other reasons. Southerners justified slavery, and we've talked about this before too, by saying we're giving them Christianity. That's awful nice. And providing them with food, clothing, and shelter. This is stupid. It's almost characterizing black people as animals that can't take care of their own needs. Like, for instance, I have 2 cats. One is an outside cat. He comes inside when he wants to. Like, when it's super cold, he'll hang out inside because it's just too cold. But mostly, even when it's cold out, he goes outside. And I have an inside cat. And in the summertime, when it's really nice out, we'll open up the patio door onto the deck, and the inside cat will step outside. But if a little tiny bird flies by, that inside cat, Norma is her name, she jets into the house because she's scared to death of everything. The outside cat will jump up and catch that bird and eat it.
Wow.
So the difference is, and this is kind of what they're insinuating here, my inside cat can't live without me providing everything that she needs. If we just turn her loose in the country, she's going to last a couple days and she's going to get eaten by a coyote. My outside cat has the skills to survive. He comes in because he wants the easy food, but if he had to survive scrounging off of mice and rodents, he's always catching mice. He's always carrying them around. In fact, he plays with them and then he eats them. If you have an outside cat, you know what I'm talking about. They'll catch a mouse, they'll carry it around in their mouth for a while, they'll set it down, then they'll chase it, bat it around, then they'll chase it some more, and then it's a game for them. And that's what Tiki, my outside cat, does. So when we look at providing them with food, clothing, and shelter, that's like making an assumption that they're not capable of surviving on their own, which is a ridiculous assumption because when they were in Africa, before they were taken as slaves on the Middle Passage, did they need food, clothing, and shelter provided to them, or could they do it on their own? Yeah. It's kind of like you guys. If you had the resources, meaning there's food in the cabinet, do you need your parents?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe that.
If you're
They have
short,
to
then
buy
yes.
food.
It depends what it is.
Could you survive if somebody provided you with the resources that you need? Because you don't have jobs, that's the problem. But let's say you had a job. Could you, it'd be difficult, but could you survive on your own?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could a 4th grader?
No.
Probably not, because they're missing some skills. You know, over the last couple years, guys, stop talking while I'm talking. It's really annoying and just stupid. Over the last couple years, many of you have developed some skills that would help you survive on your own. 3 or 4 years ago, you probably couldn't cook much. Now, you probably have some skills in the kitchen, or you know how to run the grill, or you've been given responsibilities that teach you skills like running the grill and making dinner for the family once in a while, or at least making some mac and cheese in the microwave. Right, man?
Doesn't
Ew.
really do that.
You can't even make mac and cheese?
I don't like mac and cheese.
Chop up a hot dog in
You
it.
would say you
I
don't
like
like
Thank
hot
you.
dogs.
You probably eat the mac and cheese without the cheese.
Crumble up some crispy bacon in it. Yeah.
That's actually really good.
Make the homemade stuff, not the stuff out of the box.
Dude,
All right.
Oxygen.
So because slavery is growing, it also means more people are recognize the issues with slavery. Once we recognize it's bad, we got to do something about it. I'll come back to that in just a minute. There's actually a political party that's created called the Free Soilers that want to stop the expansion of slavery. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to totally get rid of it, because that's like a war, but they want to not let it get any bigger. And their platform, their slogan was free soil, free land, free speech, free labor, and free men. That's very, very socialist. What that means is they would like to take the country and divide up all the wealth in the country. divide up all the land in the country, which sounds good because we get rid of all the poverty. We don't have anybody starving to death. We don't have anybody that's worth less than anybody else. But the issue with that, and we've talked about this before, if everybody gets the same, what happens to your incentive to work hard?
Lazy.
You get lazy. Why would I want to work any harder than Gabe if Gabe gets exactly the same as I do? Whereas the way it is now in our society in America today, I'm going to work harder than Gabe because I want to have a hotter wife.
Wow.
I want more money. I want a nicer car. My minivan's a pretty slick ride, Gabe. You're going to have trouble topping that. I want a hot tub. I want the latest iPhone. I want some AirPods. I want it all. So in order to do that, I know that I've got to do more than Gabe. Otherwise, he passes me. And every time Gabe gets something nicer than mine, I'm a little jealous of him. So I got to work harder. Okay, next person that talks without being called on, you're going to go sit in the hallway. At least if it has nothing to do with class, because all you do is confuse the people that are struggling to keep up. Okay, here's a nice fact. John C. Fremont. Where have you heard of him before?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, Fremont. In fact, we have Gateway to the West days in the summertime. In Fremont, they have John C. Fremont days. So they celebrate John C. Fremont. I'm not actually sure if John C. Fremont was ever in Fremont, but that's the man that their town is founded based on. First guy to run for president on an anti-slave platform. So the first man that had the guts to say, I want to be president, and if you elect me president, no slavery. Not even Abraham Lincoln was willing to do that. So John C. Fremont definitely stands out. And probably not going to have much of a chance to get elected. Now also, before I move on, this is the Free Soil Party with Martin Van Buren and Charles Adams. Look at this guy's creepy eyes.
Those things like stick out, bro.
That's kind of spooky, isn't it? That's a horrible graphic of that guy. I wouldn't vote for him just because he's got creepy eyes. If you were interested in political parties back then, there wasn't television to teach us about candidates, so you had to go to meetings. Here's a Free Soil meeting in Fairfield County on Thursday, something of October 1846. Or how about this? This one is a mass meeting. This one's a grand rally. Which would you rather go to, a mass meeting or a grand rally? Really?
A rally.
Jasmine wants to go to a mass meeting. I want the grand rally. That sounds way cooler, It's like when they do the monster truck commercials. It's not monster trucks on Sunday at the CenturyLink Center. It's monster truck Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Bring your family. Bigfoot crushing 9 cars. They make it sound much more fantastic than it is. So come one, come all. Speakers, Charles Sumner. All right, so the South kind of gets something that they've been wanting. Again, compromise always popping up. A new law called the Fugitive Slave Act or the Fugitive Slave Law. What is, raise your hand please, what is a fugitive? Dustin? An outlaw. Anybody else? Someone running from the law. So fugitive is someone running away. If you've been accused of a crime and you're on the run, you're a fugitive. When you're caught, then you get put on trial. So a fugitive slave is a slave that has escaped, run away. So in the last time we had class, we talked about a couple of fugitive slaves. Anybody remember one of the fugitive slaves we talked about? Harriet Tubman was a fugitive.
Oh, it was a lady. Oh,
There was another lady that we talked about briefly. The guy with the white stripe in his afro was Frederick Douglass. He was a fugitive. And the other woman was a woman named Sojourner Truth. So they were fugitives. They're hunted. Here's what happens. All of a sudden we get this assumption that the North means freedom for blacks. But the Fugitive Slave Act says that Northerners are required by law, if you come into contact with an escaped slave, it is your responsibility to return them to slavery in the South. And it doesn't mean you can just ignore it. It doesn't mean like, I don't have time. It means you have to. Most Northerners ignored it, but it also gave permission to Southerners to go into the North and act as bounty hunters. So I could go to the North, catch runaway slaves, take them back into the South and auction them back into slavery and make lots and lots of profit. What if I'm a Southern bounty hunter and I come into contact with a Northern freedman, an ex-slave that has permission to be free? They would still take them. But they have paperwork that says they're free. That's their proof. Tear it up, burn it, throw it away. So blacks were terrified of the Fugitive Slave Act, even if they were freedmen, because there was no way they could really maintain their freedom. Getting to Canada was a really smart thing to do. The South loved it. The North's response to the Fugitive Slave Act, this woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe writes a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It is fiction based on fact. So it's historical fiction. If you read historical fiction books, and I don't know what the Golden Sowers are that are historical fiction, but there's always at least one that's about like World War II or something. Are there any historical fictions this year?
Yeah.
Couple. Okay. That means when you read it, it could have actually happened, but it didn't necessarily. Uncle Tom's Cabin was so popular in the North that almost everybody read it. Remember, we discussed earlier that most Northerners were not abolitionists. But then they read Uncle Tom's Cabin and they're like, oh my gosh, slavery is horrible. We can't stand to allow something this horrible to exist in America. We've got to stand up and do something about it. Uncle Tom's Cabin was, and I don't know what the example would be today, but 20 years ago, every student that sat in my class had to read all of the Harry Potter books because they were just that popular. Everybody loved them. When the new one came out, people were all, you remember that, Mrs. Glaser? People were just jacked up excited that there's a new Harry Potter book. 8 or 10 years ago, it was Hunger Games. When a new Hunger Games book would come out, everyone was like, I'm going to read it. I don't think there's a series right now that's that popular with almost everybody. I tried to read the Harry Potter books, and I don't really love that kind of fiction. And they're too long. I lose my interest after 2 or 3 days of reading. So if I can't knock out a book in a couple of days, it better be really good. But after a while, I forget what I read, So, but Hunger Games books, those were short enough. I could read those in a couple of days, and I really like those. And that's not even my style. But everyone read Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, and it talked about the horrors of slavery. So here's the thing that we know to be true about Americans. If we don't know that there's a problem, if it's not right in our face, we don't do anything about it. But if we find out there's an issue, we address it. So if I found out that last night Peyton's house burned down, she's not even at school today because obviously she's got things to deal with. So Peyton's not here. If we found out, we're discussing it as a class, that Peyton's house burned down, what do you think our discussion might be about?
To convince the school to do a fundraiser.
Yeah, what are we going to do to help her out? Because her family, she probably needs some stuff, like all her clothes burned up. So she's going to need some stuff. Her family probably going to need some stuff because they're going to have to stay in a motel for a while until they find a place to live. All these are going to be issues. So as a group, even if you're not one of Peyton's friends, we all of a sudden care. And we're going to chip in and we're going to do everything because that's what we do. We help each other out. In the fall, it's in the news every year. Some farmer has cancer and he's having cancer treatments and he can't get out to harvest his crops. So what do his neighbors do? Harvest the crops because we like to help each other. So when we acknowledge that slavery is as bad as it is, now all of a sudden those of us that weren't abolitionists before start to think, I can't let this go on. I'm busy. I go from practice to homework to bed, but I got to do something about this. So maybe they vote for candidates that are anti-slave. Maybe they actually help free slaves on the Underground Railroad or help fugitive slaves hide from bounty hunters. But all of a sudden it becomes real to everyone because of people like Harriet Beecher Stowe. Authors have a lot of strength in getting us to do things that we don't necessarily even know we want to do. and the North loved this. So the South gets something, the North gets something. And what this is doing is it's slowly creating a division between the two. And we're seeing that gap widen because more Southerners are starting to agree with the idea of slavery, even if they don't own slaves, and more Northerners are starting to hate the idea of slavery. This is a trailer for a movie called 12 Years a Slave. So it's about a man that's going to escape slavery. He has escaped slavery and then gone back into it. We can't watch the movie because it's rated R, but the trailer, it demonstrates kind of what the treatment of a slave on a plantation in the South would be like. So it's like a minute and a half long. We'll watch the trailer. Maybe someday you'll decide to watch the movie. 12 Years a Slave.
I want to ask you what part of the country you come from. I originate from Canada. I guess what that is. Well, I know what Canada is. I've been there myself. But I traveled for a slave.
Solomon Norfolk is an excellent player on the violin.
I was born a free man. Lived with my family in New York. Been good for you, man. Until the day I was deceived.
She's Solomon.
Kidnapped. Sold into slavery.
The Slave Act.
Well, boy, how you feel now?
My name is Solomon Norfolk. I'm a free man. And you have no right whatsoever to detain me.
You're no free man. You're nothing but a Georgian runaway.
Went down to the river Jordan.
Let servant,
The old ways, Lord.
shall be
Kind of religion.
with many stripes. That's scripture.
The condition of your laborers, it's all wrong.
And my property.
You say that with I say it's fact.
Strange. Man does how he pleases with his property. You come here. I said come here. Days ago, I was with my family in my home. Now you tell me all is lost. If you want to survive, do and say as little as possible. My soul on a rising. But I don't want to survive for the year when I want to live.
I thought you know something.
I did as instructed. There's something wrong. It's wrong with the instruction.
That's about you here work. Anymore, I'll learn you 100 lessons. I know what it's like to be the object of Master's lash. In his own time. Come on, manage them all.
I will survive. I will not fall into despair. I will keep myself hardy till freedom is opportune. I was a free man. I'm not a slave.
Again, taken into slavery as a result of the Fugitive Slave Act. A couple more things and then we'll be done for today. According to the Missouri Compromise in 1820, no new slave states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. Well, we're going to pass another law called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which divides Kansas and Nebraska into two separate territories. And if you were to pull down a map over on the wall of Kansas and Nebraska territory, Nebraska territory at one point was ginormous. Already a big state, but Nebraska territory included South Dakota, North Dakota, and a large portion of Wyoming at one point. So it was huge. But they decided, instead of saying no slave states, to allow Kansas territory to decide based on popular sovereignty. That means let the people vote. If the people of Kansas vote to have slaves, they shall be a slave state. Nebraska never gets pulled into it that much because, again, we don't become a state until after the Civil War and slavery is officially ended. But if we pass the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it completely ignores the Missouri Compromise. So it's really easy to just flush things down the toilet that existed only a few years earlier. So here's what happens. When it's time for Kansas to vote in their popular sovereignty election, the issue of slavery, Kansas itself had more anti-slave people, meaning they either don't care or they're going to vote against slavery in Kansas. Missouri wanted Kansas to be a slave state. So 5,000 or so on the day of the popular sovereignty vote, 5,000 or so Missourians sneaked into Kansas and voted in the Kansas vote to try to make Kansas pro-slave. Now you might be thinking, how can you just sneak into another state and cast a vote? Because I explained to you back in November when it was my time to vote that there's only one place that I can vote. And my name is only in a book in one place. But historically, that's not the case. If it was 100 years ago, I could vote in Blair, then I could get on my horse and go to Tacoma and Herman and Decatur. I could go as far as I could get in a day and cast a vote in each place. In fact, if Blair had more than one polling place, more than one place to vote, I could go to each of them and vote, vote, vote. So 5,000 Missourians sneak into Kansas and vote for Kansas to become a slave territory or a slave state. This ticks off the anti-slave people. It readies them for war. And that's going to lead us into something called Bleeding Kansas, which will be part of our discussion later. And this guy. So this is the picture that you're going to see on the Otis worksheet that you're going to do for me on Friday. If this picture's bigger, the one in your notes, you can blow it up full screen. It's probably easier to analyze what's going on. But just a couple things to think about, and you probably have to answer this on that worksheet. Why does the artist that made this picture make the guy look to be twice the size of a normal man?
So he can stand. He's like the important part of the
He's the bigger man. He's got something more powerful.
He's powerful. He's a big deal. I mean, look, this guy's standing in front of him, so it's not because of perception. It's this guy's literally only that tall, and he's not a little person. So you kind of have to think about why is the artist doing this? And look over here, we got this flag. Well, we got a different flag. What's that flag mean? Don't answer. We got a black man here. We got something going on here. We got something in the background here. Oh, there's a fire. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this image that you're going to have to analyze and do your best. If it doesn't completely make sense, try to make sense of it. Give me an answer to justify what the question is asking you for. So that's your job on Friday, is to finish that worksheet that has to do with this. This guy's name is John Brown. That common, simple, plain name. And you'll do the John Brown worksheet. It'll be in Otis Friday morning, probably Thursday night, but that's what you'll do in class on Friday. And it should take you most of the class if you're going to do it right. And don't sit there and do nothing, because that's really difficult for me to deal with later on. Any questions about this? Because if you have, well, the people that watch it Friday, Thursday, people that watch it tomorrow won't have the same questions, but I can answer them on Monday next week. So that's all for today. We have about 8 minutes left in class. I don't want you up running around, but if you have that fun math game, Ixel, you can